The framework of our national debate about the death penalty often centers on whether or not there may be innocent people on death row, and that is a critical problem. But the fact, for me, that's the biggest problem, is that there is a death row. I'm thinking about the night that Troy Davis was executed, and there was a lot of question about his innocence, and there was an enormous outpouring. But Lawrence Brewer, the undoubted murderer of Robert Byrd, was also killed, James Byrd, excuse me, was killed that night as well. And one is a black man killed by the state for the murder of a white man, and one is a white man killed by the state for the murder of a black man. And so, people see, but no one, or it's not true that no one, but only the sort of most hardcore anti-death penalty people could put them together, because we understood why it was unjust for Davis, but I wanted to also distress us just as much that it was unjust for Brewer as well, even though we know that he committed a heinous and horrible act. How do we get there? What is the argument that helps us get there?
I have to say that, interestingly enough, we have found out that the death penalty is not given to everybody equally. And I know it's heinous murders happen, that everybody talked about it in Maryland. There were some murders that were more important, but you can't say the price of victims, what they are. And a lot of times when this thing happens, it's in this, like the Troy Davis case, for instance. He was basically I think it was 9 people who said that he had committed this crime. In the end, there was only 2 that didn't retract their statements, and one of them might have been the shooter. Yep. And possibly, in my opinion, he executed innocent. As for the other gentleman, I think, honestly, we have to stop talking about this is what's best for the country. I think in general we have to start killing our system. Like you were talking about Sister Helen in the break, and she always says it very best. Why do we kill people to say killing is wrong?
And I think the argument in the end that's going to win the day in terms of morality is reasonable people can differ about whether capital punishment is the appropriate sanction for the most heinous of crimes. But reasonable people can't differ about having a system that is just so riddled with error and so riddled with racism, frankly, in terms of deciding who lives and who dies. And that really has been the difference. It is not just the risk of executing the innocent, although that has been an extremely powerful number. When you look at the California vote, I was surprised, because California is the place where they're wasting so much money on a completely insane system and have so many people, over 700 people on the row, and they're going to spend billions literally in the next few years, and everybody knows it's dysfunctional. And yet when we analyze the vote, the biggest factor was the issue of innocence, and because it is a moral question. But the moral question comes down to, how can you stand by a system that just can't get it right? People are going to begin to see it's not just getting it right on who's innocent or guilty, and my God, there's a lot of question about that. We've executed innocent people, no doubt about it. Cameron Todd Willingham in Texas being an excellent example. But in addition, if you begin to believe and understand, as I think lawyers do, the American Bar Association, judges do, that we can't really decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die in a rational, coherent, and moral way, that moral question is going to bring it all down.
And there's a constitutional question here as well, right? Part of the reason that this is Eighth Amendment and cruel and unusual isn't just about death, but it's also about the way that we put people to death, right? This is part of why the phasing out of the electric chair and then the moving in of lethal injection. But lethal injection, it turns out, is not the peaceful, sort of not cruel thing that I think many Americans may imagine that it is.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the constitutional standard, as you said, it's cruel and unusual punishment. Folks who want to preserve the death penalty as a constitutional matter say this is frozen in 1791. So given the death penalty was permissible in 1791, that's it from an originalist perspective. The more kind of living constitutional side of the equation goes to a Trott versus Dulles case in 1958 that says we look at this according to the evolving standards of decency of maturing society, right? So it's really about who we want to be, right, rather than who we were in 1791. My former colleague, Stephen Bride at Yale Law School, used to say that we wouldn't be able to have a death penalty if one person were forced to make the decision, because once you're involved with the death penalty in any way, you see the unfairnesses, whether it's with the mode of execution, lethal injection, or with the punishment itself. And I think what you're trying to hold is a kind of moral center of saying, don't say, oh, if it weren't for the racial disparities, this would be okay. You know, oh, if it weren't for innocent individuals being executed, this would be okay. Let's go to the ultimate moral question rather than the consensus-building political issue, and say, you know, who are we as a society, and do we really believe in this kind of retributivist culture? And what Bright says is, the closer you get to this thing and the more you understand it, the more you realize that this would be impossible unless it were dispersed among a wide swath of people, because anyone who truly understood could not push that button and put that person to death under the conditions that are currently provided.
Well, the one person who might be willing to, Congresswoman, is the victims' families. And on the one hand, I have a very, very clear position on this. On the other hand, you must have constituents who say to you, I am with you on all these things, but I've lost a son, I've lost a daughter, I've lost a mother or father, and the only thing that is going to make me feel better is if there is state retribution.
Sure, and that's always the difficult issue that elected officials especially have to address, because we understand the pain and suffering of a lost one, who has been murdered. That's just unconscionable. It's hard to even fathom. However, we have to really realize that executions of the death penalty do not create more public safety. This is not going to enhance our criminal justice system. This is not going to reduce homicides. We have had a warden at San Quentin, Jean Woodford. She led the charge to try to abolish the death penalty on Proposition 34, and she saw this firsthand, what had taken place in terms of the fact that it had not increased public safety. And of course, in Proposition 34, there were victims' restitution efforts that we included, where those who were convicted and had received the sentence of life imprisonment without parole would have to work, in their salaries, of course, would be paid to the victim's family. That's not much for the loss of a family member, but it was an effort to acknowledge that this was wrong, and we in no way believe that by abolishing the death penalty and replacing it,
that there's not
still a need for punishment. And so finally, let me just say that we know it does not increase public safety.
Yep.
And elected officials who will not understand that, and there are many who do this for political reasons, who support the death penalty, and it's a tough on crime, and
exactly.
We got to get rid of the murderers, and that's how we win elections.
Yeah, absolutely. Kirk, I want to ask you just one last on this. How does this fit into a broader prisoners' rights? We do a lot on prisons and on the rights of both offenders and ex-offenders, and there's both the question of the death penalty, but also just in general how this fits into the experience of being in prison and what we think of as a just and reasonable way to incarcerate and imprison people.
I sat in prison for almost 9 years in a decade, and I have to tell you that if people are looking for a punishment to give a person, honestly, life without parole is no joke. This is you're in this cell, you're for killing a human being, and you're not going to get out. And I think that's the better part of valor to me as a human being, because that shows us accountability. Because the death penalty has given everybody, victims and the people, it has not protected anyone in this country. I was standing in Delaware recently. I just testified in front of the Senate committee to abolish the death penalty there, and I told the police officers that were in the crowd, the death penalty has not tried to save you or me from anything, and that police chiefs say, a majority of them say that it's the least thing that will help us as a society to protect us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kirk, for being here.
Yeah,
also,
pleasure.
thank you to Barry and to Kenji. Congresswoman Lee is going to hang out a little bit longer, but up next, we're going to shift gears a little bit, because we're going to begin to talk about the arts. Cleared Out, Sunday afternoon. Let's enjoy it.